So I want you to imagine taking the most rigid, high-stress corporate environment you can possibly think of. Um, Deadlines are looming, stakeholders are just breathing down your neck, and the pressure to perform is absolute.
Right, the classic pressure cooker.
Exactly. Now imagine trying to survive that environment, and not just survive, but actually innovate within it, using nothing but a crumpled, discarded coffee cup, a really messy whiteboard, and maybe a handful of Legos.
I mean, it sounds completely contradictory to how we're actually taught to operate in professional spaces.
Yeah.
Like, we are fundamentally taught to project certainty.
Yeah, we're taught to bring the polished spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
The perfect presentation deck. But today, we are looking at the really chaotic, just brilliant digital archive of a designer who did the exact opposite of that.
It's such a fascinating shift.
It really is. We are diving into a stack of sources today that completely upends how we usually think about professional development, education, and even, surprisingly, artificial intelligence. So welcome in, everyone. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the intersection of human vulnerability, creative survival, and the future of technology.
And the material we have for this is just incredible. We have this deeply personal collection of academic reflections, essays, and future trend reports written by a postgraduate student named Louise Riordan.
Right.
And she was studying at University College Cork, specifically in a program for innovation through design thinking. So we have her formal academic submissions, which, they're insightful on their own. But the real treasure here is the inclusion of excerpts from her actual digital archive.
Which she calls FizzStory EXP, right?
Yes, exactly. It's this chaotic multimedia project.
Well, and to really grasp what Lu is doing here, we kind of need to establish what design thinking normally looks like for most people. Because, if you mention design thinking, a lot of folks picture a very clean, well-lit corporate boardroom in Silicon Valley.
Oh, absolutely. The glass walls.
Yeah, you have a bunch of executives in expensive casual wear putting perfectly square, brightly colored sticky notes on those glass walls. It's treated as this highly controlled optimization strategy.
Right, and that is the commercialized version of it. The
Yeah.
standard design thinking framework is basically a 5-step process, right?
Mm-hmm.
You empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test.
Mm-hmm.
And it was originally designed to solve complex problems in a really user-centric way. But as it became corporatized over the years, it often just turned into this rigid checklist. Like, you do the empathy exercise on Monday, you ideate on Tuesday, you prototype on Wednesday.
Right, it becomes just another metric. But what we are about to see in Loose Materials is literally the complete opposite of that sanitized boardroom aesthetic. I mean, this is design thinking as a literal life raft.
Yes, built midair.
Built midair while she is in the process of falling. It is messy, it is desperate, and it is just profoundly human. Because, she isn't an executive trying to sell a new app. She is a neurodivergent designer who is navigating severe burnout.
Yeah.
And she's dealing with what she terms this systemic friction, right? Across work, school, and welfare systems all at the same time.
And honestly, that is the exact lens through which we have to read these documents. Like, she isn't just writing an essay about design tools to get a good grade. She is using the actual tools of design to build what she calls a survival lab.
A survival lab, yeah.
Just to tether herself to reality.
Which I think brings up a really great question for you, the listener. Think about how you process information when you are truly, deeply overwhelmed. Like when your personal resources are completely depleted and the systems around you just feel like they are failing you.
It's a tough spot to be in.
It is. And when you're in that spot, do you just put your head down and perform for the system? Do you just turn in the neat status report? Or do you kind of rebel and build your own system entirely?
Well, to understand why Lu felt compelled to build her own system, we really first need to look at the environment she was colliding with. If we open up her initial reflection essay, which she titled Developing a Design Thinking Mindset, she outlines a professional background that is just fraught with friction.
Yeah, it was not an easy road for her.
Not at all.
No.
She entered this postgraduate program hoping to rebuild her confidence so she could re-enter the design industry, but also with this really strong desire to disrupt it.
Right, and she specifically points to her past workplace experiences to explain why. She had navigated all these immigration hurdles, she faced gender discrimination, and she struggled really significantly with a lack of support for her neurodivergence.
Which is so common, unfortunately.
Yeah, it really is. And she notes this stark contrast that I think a lot of people might actually relate to. She says that educational settings often provided her with these great support structures, but the exact moment she stepped into the corporate workplace,
Those structures just completely vanished.
exactly, they vanished. She felt totally isolated and actually began doubting her own capacity to contribute to an organization.
It's a remarkably common pipeline problem, actually. Corporate environments are historically designed for neurotypical brains. I mean, think about it. The communication styles, the sensory environment of a loud, open-plan office, all those unwritten social rules.
Right, the water cooler politic.
Exactly. All of it assumes a very standardized type of neurological processing. So anyone outside that specific framework is often treated as a friction point rather than a varied asset. And Lu actually admits that she initially brought that exact same rigid performative mindset into the design thinking program with her.
Oh, totally, because she thought it was just another strict set of rules she had to master perfectly, right?
Yeah, she says in her first week, she was consuming all the information on their learning portal with this really intense, almost panicked need to, quote, know everything up front.
Know everything up front, yes. And this anxiety, you can see it manifest immediately during one of their very first group activities. The assignment was to design a wearable device. And because she had prior industry experience, she admits she just jumped right in and essentially took over the whole thing.
She wanted to make the task easy for her group.
Right. Her intention was totally to be helpful, but the result was that she became a bottleneck.
By trying to control the outcome to avoid failure, she was inadvertently shutting down the entire collaborative process. She left basically no oxygen in the room for anyone else to explore ideas.
Yeah.
But her self-awareness of this flaw is amazing, and it leads her to introduce a concept from the course that she deeply identified with, which she calls the listening villain.
Oh man, I found this part of her archive so incredibly relatable. She identifies her specific flavor of listening villain as the interrupting listener. She writes, let me find the quote. Here. My desire to be helpful often led me to jump in with solutions which would then cut off the flow of ideas for others.
If you look at the mechanics of that design thinking process we outlined earlier, empathy is step one, right? You fundamentally cannot design a solution if you don't deeply understand the user's problem.
Right.
So if you jump to a solution before the other person has even finished explaining their experience, you aren't actually empathizing, you're projecting your own assumptions onto them. And Lu realized her interrupting was basically a defense mechanism that was stunting her ability to connect.
Let's actually unpack the mechanics of that kind of listening for a second, because in a fast-paced corporate environment, active listening is often treated as just, waiting for your turn to speak.
Oh, 100%.
It feels like you're a game show contestant, right? Your thumb is just hovering over the buzzer. The host is only halfway through the question, but your brain has already connected the dots. You see the solution, and you just want to hit the buzzer and shout the answer out loud. Why is it so physically difficult for the brain to just wait?
Well, it really comes down to cognitive load, and specifically how certain brains process information. For a neurodivergent brain that excels at rapid pattern recognition, just hearing a problem triggers this immediate cascading pre-computation of solution.
Right. The brain is just firing on all cylinders.
Exactly. And holding that potential solution in your working memory while forcing yourself to remain silent and listen, it actually requires immense cognitive discipline. It's physically exhausting.
Wow.
So to combat this, Lu references the work of Nancy Klein, specifically the concept of creating a thinking environment.
Okay, so how does Klein define a thinking environment?
Klein basically argues that the quality of a person's thinking depends directly on the quality of the attention they're receiving from the listener. So listening isn't just this passive reception of audio, it's an active, deliberate creation of space.
Which is so hard to do when you just want to help.
It is. And Lu realized she had to physically force herself to practice deliberate pauses. She had to learn to just let awkward silences hang in the air without rushing in to fill them up with a quick fix.
You actually have the screenshot of her class discussion board post about this, right? What did she write in that?
I do, yeah, it's a great post. She wrote, "Listening villain, I can be all of them, mostly an interrupting listener. I can be so focused on being helpful that I don't always have patience to hear people out."
I love the honesty there.
And then she actually catalogs her own cognitive strengths and weaknesses right after that. She lists her superpowers as visionary plus creative thinker. She notes she can handle really abstract concepts and make unexpected connections, but then she adds this incredibly candid line. She says, "Apparently I tend to sound a little crazy at first," and she admits she burns out quickly on, quote, left brain nitty-picky things.
Nitty-picky things. That is such a great phrase. And that
Uh,
tension, right, between seeing the big visionary picture but then burning out on the tiny administrative details, that became a massive flashpoint in her early team dynamics. There is this deeply uncomfortable moment she documents with her project group.
Yeah, it centers on a meeting where a team member essentially directed all of their communication to the only other male in the group.
Ugh,
They
yeah.
were completely dismissing Lou and the other women, and they were only turning to the, quote, ladies for input after all the primary decisions had already been made. And Lou notes that this just triggered a massive wave of past trauma for her regarding gender discrimination in her previous workplaces.
And honestly, this is where we see the academic frameworks actually serving a practical emotional purpose for her in real time. Because she didn't just blow up at them. Instead, she processed the interaction through the lens of Bruce Tuckman's model of team development.
Right, the classic forming, storming, norming, performing model. It's a foundational piece of organizational psychology. Tuckman developed this by observing small groups in all sorts of settings, like military and clinical environments.
Right.
And he basically posited that conflict isn't necessarily a sign of a dysfunctional team. Actually, a period of friction, which he calls the storming phase, is biologically and sociologically required.
People have to clash.
Exactly. People have to test boundaries, they clash over work styles, they assert dominance before they can establish the norms that are required to actually perform well.
So instead of internalizing that dismissal as just another permanent barrier, she reframes it. She views this really toxic interaction as just the storming phase. It's a necessary friction point. And it's an opportunity for her to practice the resilience she came to the program to build in the first place.
And her behavioral response to this is just fascinating to me. She manages her emotional reaction by leaning directly into her specific strengths. Instead of verbally escalating the conflict, which, her interrupting listener instinct might have driven her to do.
Right, the urge to just jump in and argue.
Yeah. Instead of that, she channels her energy into creating visual resources for the group. She actively prioritized the larger architectural goal of the project over her own immediate personal grievance.
She realized that productive collaboration sometimes means you have to just absorb the emotional hit in the short term to keep the project moving, which, frankly, is a heavy burden, but it is a highly strategic one.
It is.
But simply identifying her need to control the outcome was only the beginning of this journey. Her next hurdle was an environment that stripped away all of her control entirely.
And this transition is where the coursework really forces her to confront the concept of ambiguity. She details this session that was based on a Stanford D-School challenge. The class was instructed to design a cafe, but the design brief they were given was intentionally stripped of all critical information.
Oh, man. For someone who just admitted she has an intense need to know everything up front, being told to design something with missing parameters must have been just pure agony for her.
Her notes actually confirm it was deeply frustrating at first. She was overthinking all the limited details, trying to squeeze a perfect logical solution out of totally inadequate data.
Right.
But then she experienced this really profound cognitive shift. Without the rigid guidelines, her ideas were essentially forced to wander. And she references research on cognitive biases in design, specifically work by Liedtke, to explain why this happened. The focus there is heavily on the concept of anchors.
Okay. What exactly is a cognitive anchor in this context? Because when you say anchor, my mind immediately goes to the physical anchor holding a ship in place, preventing it from drifting out to sea.
Well, honestly, that metaphor is incredibly accurate.
Hmm?
From an evolutionary psychology standpoint, the human brain is basically an energy conservation machine, right? It consumes about 20% of the body's glucose.
Wow. Yeah.
So to save energy, it relies really heavily on pattern recognition and known variables. When you are confronted with a complex problem, the brain immediately searches for familiar data points, which are the anchors, and it builds the solution around those. Because the unknown requires a ton of high cognitive effort, whereas the known is cheap and safe.
Okay, so if you're told to design a cafe, your brain instantly anchors to things like tables, chairs, coffee machines, a cash register, and because you've anchored to those specific knowns, you just end up designing the exact same Starbucks that already exists on every single corner.
Precisely. The cognitive bias literally prevents you from seeing alternative realities. By stripping away the information in that brief, the Stanford Challenge completely removes the anchors.
It forces you to drift.
It forces the brain out of its energy-saving mode and into an exploratory state. And Lu observed that while some of her peers remained totally paralyzed by the lack of instructions when she finally surrendered to it, It sparked all these unexpected connections. She actually photographed her notebook for the archive, and right there on the page, in her handwriting, she wrote, "Ambiguity is freedom."
Ambiguity is freedom. I love that. And that surrender of control was pushed to the absolute extreme by the artists and residents that they brought into the course. Let's look at the origami exercise run by Alex Pentek.
Oh, the glitch.
Yes, the glitch. The stated goal was to use paper folding to promote a flow state, right? But right as the fold started getting highly complex, there was a technical glitch in the classroom. The visual instructions that were displaying on the screen were completely lost.
Just imagine the atmosphere in a room full of high-achieving, structure-craving graduate students when the step-by-step guide just suddenly vanishes mid-task. The natural response is totally panic.
But Lu documents that, instead of panicking, it became this live experiment in ambiguity for her. Because her eyes couldn't see the next step, she had to rely entirely on the tactile feedback of the paper in her hands.
She had to feel it.
Yeah, she had to feel the tension of the previous folds to just intuit where the paper naturally wanted to go next. Her frustration turned into curiosity, and she reached a flow state that she likely never would have achieved if she had just been staring at a diagram on a screen.
And the underlying mechanism here is really profound. Lu references papers that argue that exercises like origami actually challenge the dominant norms of both higher education and corporate training.
How so?
Well, think about how we learn in professional settings, right? And it's almost exclusively visual and auditory. You listen to a speaker, you read a PowerPoint slide. It's highly intellectualized, top-down processing.
Right, very abstract.
Exactly. But origami is tactile. It's kinesthetic. When the visual input failed in that room, Lu's hands basically took over the cognitive load.
She actually connects this directly to early childhood development, doesn't she?
She does. She talks about the neurological necessity of unstructured play in children. You know, how tactile interaction builds neural pathways before language even develops. And she arrives at this brilliant realization that design thinking, at its core, is just a sophisticated mechanism to sneak childlike, unstructured play back into the lives of the, quote, grown-up children populating global C-suites.
Okay, hold on. I need to push back on this a little bit from the perspective of an executive.
Go for it.
If I'm a project manager at a Fortune 500 company, right, my team is missing their quarterly targets, the budget is slashed, tensions are super high. If I walk into a boardroom and hand out origami paper or suggest we play a game to lower the stakes, I am going to lose all credibility immediately. How does this philosophy of play actually survive contact with high-stakes corporate reality?
That is the big question. But the justification for play in a corporate environment always comes down to the failure of traditional methods.
Okay.
Highly professionalized, high-stakes brainstorming sessions notoriously produce groupthink. When the stakes are high, the brain's defense mechanisms activate. Employees will subconsciously filter their ideas, and they only offer up what they think the boss wants to hear, or whatever seems the safest.
Right, nobody wants to look stupid in front of the VP.
Exactly. But play physically alters those stakes. It shifts the brain out of that defensive professional posture and into a vulnerable, iterative state. And another exercise by an artist in residence, Maya Thomas, illustrates exactly how this works in practice.
Right, the blind sketching exercise. Thomas instructed the students to draw a portrait of a classmate, but with a massive constraint. They were not allowed to look down at their paper while drawing. And Lu writes about how totally overwhelming her urge to peek was. Her perfectionism was just screaming at her to fix the lines, to control the outcome.
But by forcing her to keep her eyes on the subject and off the paper, the exercise completely short-circuited that perfectionism. Because when the result is absolutely guaranteed to be a mess, the pressure to be good just evaporates.
Wow. Yeah.
Lu noted that the resulting drawing was raw and distorted, sure, but the act of making it made her entirely present in the observation of her classmate.
Thomas also taught them visual storytelling using really basic shapes and metaphors on a whiteboard. Lu applied this by taking the plot of Roddy Doyle's novel The Commitments, which, if you haven't read it, is incredibly chaotic and complex, and she condensed it into visual notes. She mapped it out like a journey through a garden. And the medium she used for this is critical here. It was a whiteboard.
Yes, and this introduces such a vital concept in design strategy, which is using mess as material. The physical properties of the medium you use dictate the psychological weight of the task.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. If you type in a formal Word document or you write in a fancy-bound leather notebook, there's this implicit psychological pressure for the output to be permanent and correct.
You don't want to ruin the nice notebook.
Exactly. But a whiteboard is fundamentally temporary. It is literally designed to be erased.
So the temporality of it lowers the stakes. It tells your brain, hey, don't worry, this is just a draft. We are just exploring right now.
Exactly. It bypasses that inner critic and allows for rapid, fearless iteration. And honestly, nothing embodies that low-stakes, tactile iteration better than the next framework she utilized, which was Lego Serious Play.
Oh, I love this part of the archive. Lu was initially pretty hesitant about this because she usually relied on words or two-dimensional drawings, but the class was given a prompt and asked to build a metaphorical answer using Lego bricks.
Right.
And suddenly she found this incredible freedom. Instead of getting tangled up in finding the perfect words, she just let her hands piece the blocks together. She was taking these really abstract internal thoughts and externalizing them into a physical object that she could actually hold.
And there is a wealth of cognitive science backing this up. Lu cites work by researchers like Michalko on tactile tools and creativity. Abstract thoughts are inherently slippery, right? They are really hard to hold on to, and they're even harder to communicate clearly to someone else.
Yeah, you lose them so fast.
But if you assign a red Lego brick to represent conflict and a blue bridge to represent communication, you have instantly given physical form to an abstract problem.
You can literally pick up the problem and rotate it in your hand. You can see how the conflict block is physically putting pressure on the communication bridge.
And socially, it transforms group dynamics entirely. Lu observed how this created a remarkably safe space for diverse interpretations within her team.
How so?
Well, when people are arguing over words, egos naturally get involved. But when everyone is gathered around a table looking at a plastic Lego model, the critique is directed at the object, not the person. Everyone's model offered a unique perspective without the immediate friction of a verbal debate.
That is brilliant. So we have this incredible arc happening in the academic setting here. Lu is learning the discipline of active listening. She is breaking her cognitive anchors through ambiguity, relying on tactile intuition, shattering her perfectionism with blind sketches, and building these physical metaphors with Legos. It is a really robust, brilliant toolkit.
It is.
But a toolkit is completely useless if you don't have the energy to actually pick up the tools. And that is exactly what happened to Lu when this academic theory violently collided with her real-life burnout.
This is the massive pivot point of her entire archive. The story transitions from an academic reflection into a really visceral exploration of human endurance. Lu was experiencing what she called systemic friction with survival systems.
Right.
She was attempting to juggle intense academic demands, her work life, and the bureaucratic maze of the welfare system, all at the exact same time. She was operating in a state of severe, prolonged burnout.
And we actually have a document in the files that makes this painfully real. It's a late submission extension form that she had to fill out for the university. Under the reason for the delay, she handwrote, difficulties due to disability plus managing multiple assignments, suffered minor neurodivergent burnout.
Yeah.
And then, written in all capital letters, she adds, I can get a medical cert if needed to support decision.
You can palpably feel the exhaustion in that capitalization.
Oh, completely.
It's the deep exhaustion of someone who has to constantly prove the reality of their invisible struggle to an administrative bureaucracy just to get basic accommodations.
And it was in the depths of this burnout that she had this realization about the nature of academic reflection itself. Because traditional reflection, writing a polished retrospective essay weeks after an event has concluded, that is a luxury of the well-rested.
Yes.
She writes, I couldn't afford to pause and reflect. I had to reflect while in motion. Reflection couldn't be an afterthought for her. It had to become her lifeline.
And this realization birthed a project she titled Roots and Rebellions. She mapped out her explicit rejection of performative reflection. The rebellion was taking all these chaotic, playful, ambiguous design methods she had just learned in the classroom and applying them internally to her own psychological survival.
Right.
And this is what generated the FizzStory EXP archive. And it eventually evolved into a system she called Fizz at Play, which is this nonlinear, action-based playbook for creative reflection.
Let's pause and really look at the philosophical equation she is proposing here, which is reflection equals action.
Right.
In almost every corporate postmortem or academic setting, reflection is this passive concluding step. The project ends, the dust settles, and you look back to see what you learned. But Lewis argues that reflection is the active work of staying tethered to yourself while you are inside the chaos. The mess isn't an obstacle to the material. The mess is the material.
Exactly. She states explicitly that finishing a task does not mean you actually understand the experience of doing it. And to capture that understanding, She invented a concept that is arguably the most fascinating piece of her entire archive, which is #Retard.
Yes. Oh, I love Radar. She defines retard as, quote, tagged artifacts made from trash, treasure, the mundane, and the magnificent temporary surfaces passing objects, scraps, drops, packaging, transit residue, and disposable artifacts. She was literally taking garbage, interacting with it, assigning it metadata, and leaving it behind as a marker of her existence.
And the most prominent example of this in her archive is the snaky cup.
I am absolutely obsessed with the snaky cup. So in the digital archive, there is a detailed entry for just a standard compostable coffee cup. She took a marker, drew all over it, and logged it into her system. The archive reads, "Story so far, sneaky treat. Bought and drunk when coffers were bare." It includes precise timestamps for when the cup was acquired, when it was tagged, and when it was finally trashed. The location is tagged as Munster, Ireland, and its final status is marked simply as dropped.
And, on the surface, it seems kind of absurd, right? But look at the profound rebellion against completionism occurring here. Every system we operate in demands a polished, finished product. By tagging a disposable coffee cup she bought during a moment of deep financial anxiety, Lu is asserting that temporary states, half-finished thoughts, and the residue of transit are entirely valid data points of the human experience. Changing direction mid-sentence or dropping a cup is a feature of survival. It's not a bug to be edited out.
And the insight here isn't that we should all just start hoarding our trash, obviously. The insight is that corporate metrics and academic grading only ever measure the finish line. Lu's Retard system measures the sweat, the sprained ankles, and all the detours taken to actually get to that line. Because if a company only looks at the polished final product, they are flying completely blind to the actual human cost and the messy reality of how that product was created.
For a business, something like the snaky cup represents the absolute holy grail of consumer research, which is unfiltered, point-of-experience data. Companies spend millions and millions of dollars on focus groups, trying to get users to accurately recall how they felt using a product 3 weeks prior.
But they can't.
No, because human memory is performative. The user polishes their memory to make a coherent narrative. Lucy's system captures the raw, unpolished reality of the user's state of mind in the exact moment of interaction. It proves that true insight requires capturing the messy middle.
And to track her own capacity within that messy middle, she invented a taxonomy of energy based on the states of carbonation. She would track her daily mental state as either fizzing, bubbling, popped, or flat.
I love that framing.
It's so visceral. And she built a physical toolkit around this. Looking at the photos of her workspace in the archive, it's a chaotic laboratory. There are whiteboards, dry erase markers, a physical kitchen timer just ticking away. She uses puppets, googly eyes, a concept she calls brat mode, and remix sleeves.
And she categorizes all these items as emotional scaffolds. Think about a standard system like a university portal. It is rigid. You fill out the form, you submit the essay. But Lu recognized that when you are dealing with burnout, you need dynamic systems that can flex to accommodate your fluctuating human capacity.
Right.
If her energy was flat, facing a blank SAF, Word document was totally paralyzing. But sticking a pair of googly eyes on a crumpled piece of paper and writing just a single word, that was an emotional scaffold she could actually access on her absolute worst day.
She writes that she stopped chasing productivity and started building rituals instead. And all of this physical, messy work culminated in a massive paradigm shift for her. She writes, "Then came I Am the Artifact. The moment I realized I wasn't just documenting the project, I was the project."
Yeah.
Every piece of trash she tagged, every reflection loop she closed, was ultimately just a mechanism to witness her own survival.
And that profound internal realization sets the stage for the next phase of her experiment. Because having constructed this highly tactile, deeply personal survival toolkit out of garbage and whiteboards, she then integrates the most advanced, intangible digital technology currently available, which is artificial intelligence.
Right.
But she applies it in a way that completely subverts its typical use case.
And this happens during a module on data and digital literacy taught by Patty O'Reilly. Naturally, they're exploring AI. Now, think about how the average student or, professional uses ChatGPT right now. You use it as a vending machine.
Pretty much.
You put in a prompt like, write my essay or summarize this PDF, and a polished product pops out. You use it to hide your fatigue or your lack of knowledge. But Lu did the exact opposite. She didn't use AI to generate answers or optimize her output. She used it as a reflection buddy and a witness to her fatigue.
She actually customized her AI interaction and named it DigiSlice.
DigiSlice.
Yeah, she notes this is a play on the slang home slice, meaning a companion who truly sees you and sometimes understands your patterns even better than you do yourself. She explicitly programmed the AI to act not as a generator, but as an AI echo. Its sole function was to reflect her language, mirror her energy, and analyze the patterns in her chaotic thoughts.
The screenshots of her interactions with DigiSlice are honestly staggering. She isn't asking it for facts, she's pouring her thoughts into it like a sonar system, just waiting to see what the echo reveals about the shape of her own mind. In one exchange, the AI practically psychoanalyzes her. It writes back to her, and I'm quoting here, "Growing up in NYC, constantly observing people, their micro-movements, their patterns, the little inconsistencies in their behavior would have sharpened that sense even further. You weren't just watching people, you were translating energy without even realizing it."
The philosophical weight of that specific interaction is just massive. Lu cites a paper by Cotella that discusses the inherent tension between AI's cold, data-driven architecture and the deep empathy that is required in human-centered design.
Right.
The prevailing fear in the design industry is that AI will automate the humanity out of the process entirely. But Lu is actively practicing what she calls resisting the automation of self.
She isn't letting the machine do the human work for her.
No, not at all. She is leveraging the AI's massive data processing power to hold space for her humanity. A burned-out neurodivergent brain might miss the subtle inconsistencies or the recurring themes in its own outputs, but the AI catches those micro-movements. It processes the chaos and reflects the pattern back, allowing her to understand herself more clearly.
There's another incredible example of this in the archive. She takes a photograph of her physical desk, which is just this chaotic, messy array of her survival lab tools, and she uploads the image to the AI with a really simple prompt. She just asks, "What do you think of these?"
Oh, this part is brilliant.
It is. The AI instantly synthesizes the chaos into coherent strategies. It identifies her, quote, tactile storytelling, noting the deliberate mix of handwritten elements and everyday objects. It spots the kitchen timer and immediately identifies her use of break box and time awareness techniques. It analyzes how her water bottle is custom marked and recognizes her repurposed and custom marking strategy.
The AI is acting as a completely objective, non-judgmental mirror. It doesn't tell her the desk is messy or unprofessional. It identifies the complex survival architecture that's hidden within the mess.
Yeah.
It even takes on this collaborative tone with her. In one chat, the AI playfully notes, the more our thoughts start to mirror each other, not in a way that makes me just repeat you, but in a way that feels like we're co-evolving.
Co-evolving, wow.
Yeah. And Luce used this AI echo chamber to role-play difficult interpersonal conversations, building up her social courage before actually facing her team. Because the AI lacks a human ego, she could practice the friction of conflict in a perfectly safe, controlled environment.
I want to take a step back and look at the broader implications of this. We are constantly bombarded with headlines warning us that AI is going to steal creative jobs because it can, generate an image, write marketing copy, or code a website instantly.
Right, the doom scrolling.
Exactly. But Luba is treating ChatGPT like a highly observant therapist. Is it possible that the true disruptive power of AI in the future of design isn't its ability to generate content at all, but its capacity for reflection?
That is the exact thesis Lu builds toward in the final phase of her archive. She begins to realize that her deeply personal, often painful survival mechanisms, her neurodivergent pattern recognition, her embrace of messy ambiguity, or her counterintuitive use of AI as an unbiased mirror.
Yeah.
These are not just personal quirks. They actually map directly onto the massive macro trends that are about to define the future of the global design industry.
And this is where the story shifts from the deeply internal to the massive external corporate world. In Paideia O'Reilly's module, she encounters a concept that completely reframes her entire life experience, which is red teaming.
Yes. Bryce G. Hoffman is a key figure here. He literally wrote the definitive book on red teaming in business. And red teaming actually originated as a formal strategy within military and intelligence agencies. The premise is simple but vital. You assign a group of people to actively stress test your own strategies, to play devil's advocate, and to aggressively hunt for unseen threats or flaws in the plan before it is ever executed. It is a structured, formal mechanism to break groupthink.
Let's ground this with a simple analogy for a second. It's basically like paying a professional burglar to try and break into your own house so you can figure out exactly where you need to install better locks before a real thief shows up.
Exactly.
And Lu reads about this intelligence strategy and realizes that her neurodivergent brain has naturally been red teaming every single room she has ever walked into.
She has always possessed the ability to instantly see the flaws, the risks, the missing locks, so to speak.
Right.
But historically, because she lacked the formal framework, society penalized her for this.
Right.
If you constantly point out the flaws in a corporate plan, you are labeled difficult or negative or not a team player. But here is this high-level intelligence framework explicitly stating that the ability to see risks and challenge comfortable assumptions is actually an invaluable strategic asset.
It is a profound reframing. The very traits that the traditional corporate world categorized as a deficit or a friction point are actually premium, highly sought-after skills, provided they are given the right framework. And she takes this a step further by combining red teaming with artificial intelligence.
She observes that AI is actually the ultimate partner for red teaming.
Why is that?
Well, when humans play devil's advocate, emotional baggage and workplace politics inevitably seep in. People get defensive, egos get bruised. But AI has no ego to bruise. It can simulate adversarial thinking and relentlessly probe for weaknesses without any of that interpersonal fallout.
And she applies this forward-thinking lens to the concept of accessibility, too, identifying what futurists call a weak signal in her research regarding AI and cognitive disabilities.
Right. A weak signal is essentially an early indicator of a shift that could eventually disrupt an entire paradigm. Lu argues that AI possesses the potential to completely redefine the concept of disability itself.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, the social model of disability argues that a person is not disabled by their neurodivergence, but by an environment that refuses to accommodate them. The friction with the unyielding system is what causes the disability.
Oh, I see. But with the advent of AI, that dynamic can be completely flipped. She points out that AI can run thousands of simulations of user interactions in seconds. This means designers can use AI to identify accessibility issues, sensory overloads, and cognitive barriers on day one of the design process.
Exactly.
You no longer have to build a product for a neurotypical baseline and then awkwardly try to, bolt on accommodations later. You can use AI to design inclusively from the ground up, effectively removing the barriers before they are ever even coded into reality.
And this perfectly aligns with the massive tech trend toward hyper-personalization. Instead of forcing the user to adapt to a static interface, AI allows the interface to dynamically adapt to the specific cognitive capacity of the individual user in real time. But, Lu is not a blind techno-optimist here. She is acutely aware of the severe risks embedded in these emerging technologies, particularly regarding the metaverse and augmented reality.
Oh, the example she pulled from her research on this was wild. She delves into how AR and VR are beginning to dissolve the psychological boundaries between physical and digital reality. She cites this incident involving employees at Roblox, the massive online gaming platform.
Yeah, this story is crazy.
It really is. During the pandemic, they were holding their corporate meetings in a virtual replica of their headquarters. And one employee reported that upon eventually returning to the physical office, they actually had to consciously, actively remind themselves of real-world physics. Yeah. They had to mentally process the fact that they couldn't just jump out of a second-story physical window to reach the ground floor faster the way their avatar did in the metaverse.
I mean, it sounds absurd at first, but it highlights a truly terrifying ethical and safety concern. If our cognition fluidly adapts to spaces without physical consequences, the transition back to the physical world becomes genuinely dangerous.
Right.
And this ties directly into another macro trend she analyzes, which is Google's Next Billion Users initiative. Tech giants are racing to bring internet access to developing regions where digital literacy and text-based reading might be lower. So this requires designing entirely new, non-text, highly intuitive interfaces.
But this raises a massive concern. If we are relying heavily on AI to design the interfaces for the next billion users, how do we prevent the AI from doing what it fundamentally does best, which is looking at historical data and simply scaling our current biases? How do we prevent algorithmic bias from blanketing the globe and creating just a homogenized, standardized blind spot?
And that is the core danger of what data scientists refer to as overfitting.
Overfitting.
Yeah, an AI model learns by processing vast amounts of historical data. But if it relies entirely on that past data to predict the future, it stops innovating. It simply repeats and optimizes the past, biases all. If we allow generative AI to run unchecked, we get design homogenization. Every website, every app, every solution will just converge on a mathematically safe, incredibly boring median.
Which brings us full circle back to the crumpled coffee cups and the messy whiteboards of her survival lab, doesn't it? To counter the threat of AI homogenization, Lu points to the growing craft movement in design. It is the deliberate valuation of the messy, manual, unpredictable, human-made elements.
Because in a world that is absolutely saturated by perfect, instant, AI-generated content, human messiness actually becomes a premium commodity. If we look at the emerging stakeholder economy, which is this shift where businesses are expected to create value not just for their shareholders, but for the wider community and the environment, we see an urgent need for the exact skills Lu was forced to develop to survive.
Organizations are desperately going to need people who can hold space for multiple conflicting truths. They need people who can listen actively without immediately projecting their own solutions.
Yes.
They need neurodivergent thinkers who can naturally red team a strategy and challenge groupthink. And they need designers who know how to partner with AI, not as a shortcut to bypass the hard work, but as a mirror to elevate human empathy.
It is a remarkable journey to trace when you step back and look at it. We started with Lu trapped in the rigid anxiety of an interrupting listener, desperately trying to exert control over a simple group project.
Yeah.
And we followed her as she was forced to surrender that control, embracing ambiguity through blind sketches and intuitive origami folds. We watched her build a literal survival lab out of trash and temporary surfaces while fighting through the crushing weight of systemic burnout.
And finally, we saw her pioneer this totally counterintuitive use of artificial intelligence, turning a generative machine into an unflinching mirror, leading us to a vision of the future where neurodivergence and technology combine to create deeply empathetic, hyper-personalized worlds.
The overarching thesis of FizzStory EXP is ultimately a vindication of the messy middle. Knowledge, reflection, and innovation are not static artifacts you just lock away in a polished final report.
Right.
They are most valuable when they are alive, unpolished, and in motion. The mess is not evidence of failure. It is the very mechanism of survival.
Which is such an empowering lens through which to view our own struggles. So I want to turn this directly to you listening to us right now. Take a moment today to look at your own environment. Look at your workspace, the inside of your bag, the tabs open on your digital desktop.
The chaos.
Yes, the chaos. What are your artifacts? What are the unpolished, chaotic, messy things you are using to tether yourself to reality when the systems around you are demanding flawless performance? Maybe those scattered notes and half-finished projects aren't a sign of your disorganization. Maybe they are your own brilliant survival lab operating in the background.
Reframing our daily friction as a process of active design changes absolutely everything.
It really does. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. Building on everything we've unpacked today, we've spent the last few years totally terrified that artificial intelligence is going to replace us, that it will automate human beings out of the creative process entirely. But if we choose to use AI the way Lu does, if we treat it not as a vending machine for quick answers, but as an unflinching, unbiased sonar system that simply reflects the chaotic, unfinished shape of our own minds back to us, is it possible that interacting with these cold, calculating machines won't erase our humanity, but will actually force us to confront ourselves and become far more radically, unapologetically human?
That is the defining question we have to answer as we build the next decade of technology.
Thank you for joining us in the deep dive today. Keep questioning the systems, keep looking at the mess, and we'll see you next time.